now and hand over to my friend and colleague, Alan Jones. But let me say before I do, that the Australian people have no better advocate than Alan Jones. This isn't just someone who gets up at 2:30 every morning, devours everything there is to be read and heard, and then comes onto the radio to give us a highly intelligent, deeply thoughtful perspective on the news of the day. This isn't just someone who literally bleeds with decency and concern for people who have no one to speak for themselves. This is someone who has been, if you like, ombudsman at large for the Australian people for as long as anyone can remember. And I have to say, he is, as far as I'm concerned, the spiritual director of the Liberal Party. On this particular issue, there are very few people who have studied it more and who feel as passionately about it, so I'm delighted now to listen to Alan.
I know you're desperate to hear, Alan, but I should justify why ACM has this session. Is because we're arguing that rather than wasting time on that festering old issue of a republic, we should be looking at the really important issues. And one of them is, of course, and Alan has been so strong, Alan has been the leader in this regard, and that is the drought-proofing of this nation. It is a pressing issue, become more apparent because of the horror that is going on in the country at the moment. But there is a constitutional obstacle to this, and that is in Section 100. Not Section 100 itself, but because Section 100 has been turned into a dead letter. Almost a fifth of the time, 2 weeks of the convention in the 19th century, in 1898 in Melbourne, the session in Melbourne, was spent on this issue to reach a compromise, to reach something satisfactory and acceptable to the states and the people of Australia. And the result was Section 100 of the Constitution, which says that the Commonwealth shall not abridge, that means restrict, the rights of a state or residents, obviously farmers. The Commonwealth must not restrict the rights of the farmers to the reasonable use of the rivers for conservation and irrigation. No mention of anything else. And they spent so much time on that. It was Alexander Downer's ancestor who worked out the compromise, which was acceptable to everybody. That is, the Commonwealth should be concerned with navigation, the states concerned with irrigation and conservation, and that the people, the farmers, should not have their right to the reasonable use of the rivers be restricted. I've never heard any politician talk about this, but Tony has, and Pauline Hanson spent some considerable time on this. It's been evaded by a combination of lawyers, politicians and judges, because the laws which restrict the reasonable use of the water of the rivers are being made under another power, in particular the external affairs power, under treaties, United Nations treaties about the environment. Nothing in the Constitution about the Commonwealth having any power whatsoever over environmental matters. In relation to the rivers, they were to deal with navigation, and the states were to be left with irrigation, not environmentalism, but conservation, which means harvesting the waters of the rivers, not letting them run out to sea. On this, the prophet, the leader of the nation on this, has been, as Tony referred to him, the ombudsman of forgotten and lost causes, the man that so many listen to every morning. He doesn't restrict his life to that. He does an enormous amount of effort into activities for which he is not paid, but which advance the interests of sports and culture and of worthy people in Australia. Ladies and gentlemen, Alan Jones.
Thank you, David. That's very kind of you. It's indeed an honour to be here in the distinguished company of, and I'm about to embarrass one person in the room, but I don't apologise for that. I regard Tony Abbott, and it gives me an opportunity to say this today, in the light of some of the rubbish you read every day. I regard Tony Abbott as a remarkable Australian, one of the finest people I've ever known. Is a man not just capable of articulating policy and writing with great clarity, but also, put simply, a firefighter and a lifesaver. Yeah. The quintessential Australian. And I can tell you, those who may not know him as well as I do, he never changes. Tony Abbott is the same to everybody. As his courageous stand on energy policy, recently simply arguing that signing up energy policy to Paris was nothing more than a national economic suicide note. Likewise, signing a global compact on migration was going to visit upon us the problems that we see in Europe, in Sweden, in Germany. We have an enormous lot to thank this man for. Let me just make one other point. I noticed that the former Prime Minister, and thank God we're rid of him, for mine, New York is not far enough away. He got there by stabbing a good man, Peter King, in the back to win pre-selection for the seat at Wentworth. He won the opposition leadership by stabbing a fine Australian, Brendan Nelson, in the back. He won the Prime Ministership by stabbing Tony Abbott in the back, who had won 25 seats from the Labor Party in 2 elections. No Liberal leader, no Labor leader has ever done that in the history of Australian politics. Leaves Parliament because he argues that if you're no longer Prime Minister, you should go. So that was all he was ever interested in, not serving the electorate. This man chooses to stay, to fight for the country, to fight for policies, to fight with ideas, and to fight for his electorate. Mr Turnbull did throw a hand grenade at the weekend in relation to Tony Abbott and Kevin Rudd and argued that these were men who were filled with hate. Let me tell you this. I've known Tony Abbott for decades. I've never heard Tony Abbott utter a hate-filled sentiment in his life. And if I can be very critical, I did tell him, and if the media are here, I don't care. Not long into his Prime Ministership, I told him there was a person I thought he should get rid of because he was white-handing and undermining his leadership at every turn. And I then warned him that he'd had too much of a Christian education and started to say, but Alan, look, you know, you must understand that... and so he was always giving the enemy the benefit of the doubt. The benefit of the doubt. And many of us, I don't think, have that Christian capacity. Wonderful person. So, Tony, it might sound like a bit of an ego massage, but these things have to be said, and I don't have any hesitation in saying them. Thank you, David, for asking me to speak, because David Flint is also a remarkable Australian. Also occupying a fertile field of ideas, and he always invigorates us in the presentation of those ideas. Drought-Proofing Australia. If there's one aspect of public administration that highlights the incompetence and indifference of government, it must surely be water management over the last any number of years. And therefore, based on what we know of that period, it's hard to be optimistic about politicians getting the nation out of the mess that politicians have put us in. It is absolutely essential that the national government take responsibility for a national crisis. And it's taken us a long time to get to this point. John Howard, as Prime Minister, said that we're going to have to pay more for water, and by that he meant a price that reflects the cost of recovering, storing and replacing supplies of water, not just the cost of delivering it. Well, the public may well be prepared to pay more for water if they could be guaranteed supply. And that essentially applies to people in the bush. For example, there is a dishonest argument that we are a nation short of water. Every day you've got nearly 4 billion litres of water not used in the Ord River system in Western Australia. 4 billion litres every day, and the Fitzroy River system is 50 times greater than the Ord. Only 10% of Lake Argyle's water is used for the Ord irrigation system. 45 tonnes of water a second is pushed every day into the Timor Sea. 45 tonnes of water a second. 4 billion litres a day. Queensland, go northeast of Queensland, 11 o'clock approximately on that map of Queensland. Northeast has 4 times the water of the Murray-Darling Basin. The total flow down the Murray-Darling Basin is less than 23,000 gigalitres. In the northeast coastal region of Queensland, 70,000 gigalitres flow into the sea. You have to wonder whether we haven't left our brains behind. A gigalitre is 1,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools. So northeast Queensland has 70,000 multiplied by 1,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools flowing into the ocean. The Gulf of Carpentaria, that's the northeast, this is going out west now, the Gulf of Carpentaria has 130,000 available gigalitres. 130,000 times 1,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools. You think of this. Or 400 billion litres of sewage. Most of it untreated, goes into the ocean just off the coast of Sydney every year. 400 billion litres. Remember one thing, we flush our toilet with the same water that we make our tea with. What a waste. I'll come to that in a moment. 90% of Singapore's water used to be piped from Malaysia ever since Singapore gained independence. When it came around to renewing the licence for the water, the costs had escalated so much that Singapore could no longer afford to buy its water from Malaysia. Almost 20 years ago, Singapore started replanning its water and sewage strategy. It's now completed the installation of a brand new sewerage system, which, when fully operational, will recycle reprocessed sewage water 100% fit for human consumption. Singapore. Not a syllable in Canberra about any of this. Because Canberra for years has been a prisoner of the Wentworth Group. Isn't that appropriately named? Continue to tell you that diverting water is snake oil stuff. We're told we can't use the Ord River surplus, we can't use the northeast Queensland water, we can't build dams, when it rains we can't harvest the water, but we can build a 3,200 kilometre pipeline to carry gas from Papua New Guinea to Brisbane. We can build a fairly useless railway line from Darwin to Alice Springs with nothing to put on the carriages. We can't harvest water, we can't transport water, and we can't dam it. Well, consider Libya as an example. 95% of Libya is desert. They have the largest water transport project in the world. It cost US $25 billion. It's the Great Man-Made River Authority. It was launched in 1983. Oh, we laugh at Libya now. They need a spring offensive. They're 10th world compared to us, really. 1983. They moved water through pipes 4 metres in diameter, over 1,200 kilometres of desert plain, 700 kilometres of rocky plateaus, cliffs and dry riverbeds. The total depth of the wells which have been drilled for the project, 1,300 of them, the total depth is more than 70 times the height of Mount Everest. Some of the 1,300 wells have been drilled up to 500 metres deep. They pump 700 trillion litres of water a minute to supply 2 million square metres of water, remember it's desert, a day to Benghazi, Libya's second largest city. The second stage of the project was finished in September 2000, completely watering Tripoli. The Libyans can do it, we can't. There is plenty of water in this country. we don't harvest it. The late Kerry Packer and the late Dick Pratt, the late Sam Chisholm, John Singleton and myself, amongst others, started Farmhand in 2002. One of the objectives was we stuck our own money in to drought-proof Australia. We called on the government then to rebuild Australia, to issue infrastructure bonds, to form a national development bank, and to make Watering Australia the Snowy Mountains project of 2004. We called upon the government then to make it their political legacy. Nothing's happened. The can-do country that we saw after World War II has become the won't-do or the can't-do on the issue of water. Obviously, pricing is a key to the sustainable use of any resource, but we must pay that price. There's no doubt that water is used unsustainably in many parts of Australia, but we oughtn't to imagine that we're short of water because we're not. What we're short of is the courage to get the water from where it is to where it's needed. There have been some suggestions that that's all too difficult. Put simply, our water crisis is man-made through poor management, self-interested politics, ignorance and indifference. It is possible to drought-proof our cities, and it ought to be possible to put our agriculture on a sustainable footing, permanently sustainable footing. Consider this. As with most things, it is the failure of state and federal governments on the infrastructure front over the past 30 or more years that has brought us to this impossible set of circumstances today. Recently, I alluded to figures from the Australian Bureau of Statistics showing that in the 1960s, state and local governments regularly allocated 2% or more of gross domestic product to capital spending for electricity, gas and water supply. 2%. That's nearly 60 years ago. By 1994, capital spending on electricity, gas and water infrastructure was down to 0.7%, half of what it was in the early 1980s. And that 0.7% included 0.2% from the private sector. Today, I can't even get the figures. They don't exist. We virtually have had nothing since the Snowy Mountains scheme of national significance, and in New South Wales only the Warragamba Dam, which was completed in 1960. Indeed, dams fell out of fashion. You might remember the Goss government in Queensland when Kevin Rudd, I might add, was a senior advisor, decided in 1989 not to proceed with a new dam at Wolfdean. The Carr government cancelled plans that had been on the books for years for a new dam on the Shoalhaven River. It's a double whammy. Halve the spending on capital works and allow the Greenies to run you out of town on the issue of dams. Then, of course, there's the business of rainwater tanks. Wherever did this loony notion derive that you couldn't have a rainwater tank in your backyard? That's easy. I'll tell you how. As Dr. Peter Coombs, a man who has dedicated more than 30 years of his life to the development and understanding of urban, rural and natural water cycles, told me years ago, there are plenty of solutions to the water shortage, but they're not in the interests of big water. You see, state governments created water and sewage acts to force citizens to use mains water. Ban the tank so that we have to buy from the government system and use this as a revenue stream for government. And that's why they gave water monopolies wide powers to make profits from selling water and sewage services. They didn't want you having your own water. And these water monopolies all have a single shareholder, the government. And all the state governments want are dividends. And that's what they've been getting. Indeed, around the country, state governments have dragged more than $1 billion a year from their water monopolies. Most of the water from those monopolies comes from dams. No cost in any of it to them. But the water monopolies regulate other alternative water sources. They love centralised management and single solutions. They like to take water from a big dam, treat it to drinking water quality, transport it via expensive and leaky infrastructure across large distances to its users in households and businesses. You've paid for all that infrastructure. As Peter Coombs said, the centralised system also transports urban sewage and stormwater runoff, again, via extensive pipe networks and dump it into the ocean. We've paid for that infrastructure. Then, of course, our stormwater and our sewage, having reached the ocean, some loony in government decided we need to bring it back. So we'll have to desalinate it first. Salinate it and then desalinate it. Then you'll fork out $2 billion for the privilege to build a desalination plant. And then when it's switched off, how are you, sir? This man is one of the world's great scientists. He's been to the moon. Here. Pardon me, give me a drink, having seen you. But you're late. This powerful presentation. And you missed the Prime Minister speaking. Once a Prime Minister, always a Prime Minister. So, cop this. When the desalination plant is switched off, it costs Sydney Water ratepayers and taxpayers $579,000 a day when it's switched off, or $200 million a year. When it's switched on, it costs $592,000 a day. No public debate about this when it's operating. As Peter Coombs said, the bigger the city, the less efficient the system. The bigger the monopoly, the more powerful it becomes. Their only response is a more centralised solution, hence the desalination plant. We are not short of water. We've got any amount of sewage that can be recycled, any amount of rainwater and stormwater runoff from urban Australia that can be harvested. The volume of sewage discharged, now the pipes are sewerage and the stuff in it is sewage. The volume of sewage discharged is half the volume of total household use. Add that to the water that rushes down the gutters, even after a small rain shower, and you've got an untapped resource that means no city should be short of water. And this could happen anywhere in regional Australia. The federal government should match dollar for dollar every local government instrumentality that implements a recycling plant. We could make ourselves completely independent of Warragamba Dam. But of course, that's at the end of the day, is not what government wants. When did you last hear, as Peter Coombs said to me, a water authority explain that roofs were significantly more efficient for harvesting water? Now, we're experiencing a water crisis. We're not and never have been short of water. I was interested in a point that Dr. Peter Coombs made to me years ago, that the National Water Commission had commissioned a consultant with no experience of rainwater tanks to evaluate the, quote, economic efficiency of rainwater tanks. In other words, they were talking about taxing citizens who saved water by installing rainwater tanks. That means the economic benefits of saving water at the household area were ignored because those water savings would reduce revenue to water authorities and to state governments. So anything that Big Water can't send a bill for is considered to be an economic loss. As Peter Coombs made the point, citizens have to seek approval from a water monopoly to install a competing water source, whether it's a rainwater tank or any other proposal that will make a contribution to saving water. It's hard to escape the conclusion that government is about maintaining water revenue rather than securing a sustainable water future. Then you've got the recycling dishonesty. Successive New South Wales governments have ruled out recycled drinking water. What the hell do these people think we've been drinking for years? We are already drinking recycled water in the city. Can anyone explain to us what goes into the Warragamba Dam? When we drink from the Warragamba Dam, it is a mix of what has been caught in the 9,000 square kilometre catchment. This includes waste from millions of animals and the inflow of storm water, waste from Lithgow, Goulburn and other towns, villages and farms that discharge water into the catchment area. So a cocktail of waste water enters the dam every day. It's then filtered for consumption. That's what the massive Prospect water filtration plant is about. It's recycling water. The nonsense that was rejected in Toowoomba 10 years ago ought to shame every politician. I went up there to support Di Thorley, had a wonderful proposal, they were running out of water. And she was wanting to recycle sewage, to purify it to a quality better than water used for kidney transplants. And a scare campaign torpedoed it. We're talking about water that was treated to the same or better quality than existing water. At worst, it should be used for non-drinking purposes like flushing toilets and watering gardens or washing machines or whatever. But many polls have shown universal support for some use of treated effluent. That water is used overseas. It's been proposed by water experts as a way of ending uncertainty about our water supply. Adelaide recycles more than 20% of its water, Sydney 3%. But of course you've got this stupid business from Toowoomba years ago where authorities proposed pumping treated sewage into the local dam, then treating it again before supplying it to homes, and they'd never run out of water. The quality of water, I repeat, would have been better than that used in kidney transplants. But a millionaire Berghofer talked about it being, and I won't use the language he used, but my language, being toilet to tap. Toilet to tap. He did say Toowoomba people should be told they'll be drinking SHIT. That was his campaign. That was his campaign. The Di Thorley proposal was torpedoed. Berghofer should be locked up. As I said, we've got a wretched record in the state of doing anything about water. We were supposed to build the Welcome Reef Dam on the Shoalhaven, which would have harvested water. Bob Carr got terrified by people in 2 Labor electorates and in 2003 locked the whole area up as a nature reserve. How much has our population increased in the past 20 years? High rises all over our city and suburbs. Don't imagine there are any answers here. One day it's desalination, another day it's recycling, another day we're going to mine the aquifers, but no serious commitment to rainwater and stormwater harvesting. We're told by governments that Sydneysiders don't want to drink recycled stormwater and wastewater, but they want to drink what comes out of the Prospect water filtration plant. Are these people dumb or duplicitous? I'd suggest both. The treatment plant at Warragamba Dam isn't designed and wasn't designed to treat wastewater to the high quality achieved currently in modern recycling plants. And Warragamba Dam, as I've said, contains effluent before it's then cleaned up. And recycled water is cleaned to a higher standard today than the water we get from Warragamba via the Prospect water filtration plant. It's cheaper and more sustainable than desalinated water, and it doesn't waste energy, and it doesn't pump as many carbon emissions into the air if you're worried about all that stuff. Contrary to the impression created by government and the so-called experts, water is not scarce. In a study in 2006, the Business Council of Australia called this one of Australia's greatest myths. Our political hurdle, one political hurdle we have to overcome, is higher price. But if we ask the public, hammered into submission by the current catastrophe, whether they'd be prepared to pay a higher price, I guarantee we could secure supply. When we guarantee we could secure supply, they'd be more than happy to do it. We have some of the lowest prices for urban water in the world. Below $1 per kilolitre, which is 1,000 litres, compared with $2 in Britain and approaching $3 in Germany and Denmark. The Australian price works out at 1 cent for every 10 litres of water of drinking quality. Put another way, the average Australian's electricity bill is 4 to 6 times higher than it is for water. As I've said often, it does rain, even during the worst drought in living memory, but we continue to fail to harvest most of the water. The City of Sydney, I repeat, pumps 450 billion litres of once used water out to sea, recycling only 3%. That's 1,000 Olympic swimming pools worth of water pumped out to sea every day. But rather than addressing this incredible waste, governments have allowed serious attempts at recycling to be sabotaged by ignorant lobby groups, as we saw in Toowoomba, and by public utilities, as in Sydney Water's obstruction of private operators who want to recycle sewage. Recycled water is as clean or cleaner than what we already drink, and it's drunk in Japan, Singapore, the USA and Britain. There's no point in arguing that reversing the mistakes of the past is too expensive without exploring whether the public is prepared to pay the cost and whether the benefits outweigh the cost. What is the exact cost? Well, it surely isn't just the cost of transporting water, because that cost has got to be weighed up against the benefit it would provide. How much money do we spend in drought relief every year? Now, we've got plenty of energy to talk about the Murray-Darling River system. Don't start me on that. Tony, That's an essay for another day. Who looked after the Murray-Darling system before white settlement? It didn't need environmental flows, did it? Did it? I don't think so. We now interfere with nature at a ridiculous cost. And we keep taking water from farmers, for which they've already paid, and which goes into putting food on our table, and we call it environmental flows. As I speak to you, a Liberal government is talking about taking another 450 gigalitres, 2/3 of Sydney Harbour of water, from irrigators, to add to the almost 2,750 gigalitres, more than 5 Sydney harbours already recovered from farmers, which they pay for environmental flows. That's since 2012. This is not a joke. This is a national disgrace. The Murray-Darling system is a disgrace. Don't worry about the fact that $100 million worth of farm milk, 500 jobs, $200 million worth of food production will be lost as water is taken. It's called the disgraceful Murray-Darling Basin Plan, and Liberal and Labor governments sing off the same sheet of music. I'm simply saying that where is the energy and enthusiasm to do something equivalent to the Snowy Mountains hydroelectric scheme? I've said more times than I can count that Jack Beale was a minister in the Askin government in the 1940s. He was also a chartered engineer and chairman of the Water Research Foundation of Australia. Over 40 years ago, he proposed the development of the Clarence Basin in northern New South Wales to create a giant water and power project that would dwarf the Snowy Mountains scheme. Under the plan, 14 storage dams linked by cuttings, tunnels and pipelines would divert inland some of the 5 million megalitres of water, or 10 Sydney harbours, that flow out to the sea from the Clarence River Basin every year. Beale wrote, "Surplus coastal water is the logical future source for arid inland development and electricity generation." He said the water captured under the scheme could be diverted to Queensland and into the Murray-Darling, doubling the flow of the latter and minimising salinity. But then he said this, isn't this magnificent? This is the quote of the century. Beale: "A nation can't afford to let resources remain idle, even if it has to build pyramids." Beale argued there was sufficient will. This could be underway by 1988 and completed by the centenary of Federation, 2001. It's now 2018. Not one syllable of that proposal has been addressed. To be fair, in 1983, the Fraser government, when I was working for them, approved $4 million, which was a lot of dough then, to investigate Beale's idea. The incoming Hawke government cancelled the approval. The only redeeming feature, and the biggest feature, is the public are not stupid. Back in 2007, Greg Mansell from St Leonard's wrote a letter to the paper which said, "Worried about a voter backlash, Mr Yemmer?" That was when Morris was the Prime Premier and rejected the use of recycled water. Greg Mansell said, "Then note that I'll only vote for a party which promises to seriously investigate recycling our water and make a decision based solely on scientific and economic evidence." Another, Lisa Twaddell from Willoughby, said, "Why do so many people fail to notice that all water is recycled? Whether through nature or a recycling plant, we could all be drinking Napoleon's recycled sewage at any moment." Or as Hugh Rose of Nimitabella, where Angus Taylor comes from, wrote, "The water we drink could have been poured from one of the goatskin bags of Socrates. It could have drowned the gunner's mate on the Revenge. Indeed, it could have flushed the bidet of Simone de Beauvoir." He said, this is at the time of that lunatic Berghoff in Toowoomba, he says, "You'll be drinking history, Queenslanders, lighten up." The Australian newspaper got it right. But this is how far out of step we are. When it editorialised on December the 26th, 2006, 12 years ago, Australian newspaper, "The real picture on Australia's water shortage is now clear. It has little to do with changing weather patterns or the drought. In short, state governments have spent decades avoiding their responsibility to invest in water security. Instead of proper planning, water authorities have squeezed the supply of water to consumers through restrictions to allow state governments to pocket hundreds of millions of dollars a year in dividends. The editorial went on. The monopoly position enjoyed by water utilities has allowed state governments to get away with it. Consumers have been banned from washing their cars and are now forced to water their gardens by bucket on selected days in some major cities, have been denied the choice to pay for the water they want to use it to preserve their lifestyle. It went on. As a result, per capita water consumption has been squeezed to the same level as 5 decades ago. Much of the water use reduction has been justified by the glib, water-wise mantra of environmental responsibility. But in truth, the figures show it has more to do with state government greed. It went on. Water recycling technology has been available and widely used around the world for decades. Consumers are overwhelmingly prepared to accept recycled water for domestic use. 69% of poll respondents accepted the idea of drinking recycled sewage. 29% said they'd be prepared to use it in their homes for non-drinking purposes, such as flushing toilets or watering gardens. Of the 1,200 surveyed, only 2% were against both options, and only 0.5% didn't have an opinion. The editorial ended. State governments should forget about referenda on whether water should be recycled and just get on with it. A market should be established in wastewater to break the state monopoly on supplies, injecting much needed competition into the domestic water supply market. Only then will water resources be properly priced and consumers not have their lifestyles frustrated and expectations let down by the short-term thinking of politicians exploiting a captive market. Well, finally, none of this will succeed while ever we persist in crocodile tears about how we are a dry continent. We're anything but. Plenty of water. We just lack the guts to harvest it, recycle it, take it from where it is to where it's needed. And by the way, you would expect me to offer a postscript. You'll be fascinated. Prime Minister John Howard, I might take a little credit here. This was at the time when the member for Wentworth was causing all sorts of problems in the Howard government, releasing economic policy that someone else had written for him, and driving Costello, the very, very fine treasurer, insane. I remember having a conversation with Prime Minister Howard, and he said, "What are we going to do with this person?" I said, "I've got a good idea," because I was going on with this water stuff. "Make him the Minister for Water." So he did. Made him the Minister for Water. What did he achieve?
Nothing.
Pardon?
Nothing.
I can't hear you.
Nothing.
Correct. Nothing. Then he was Minister for the NBN. Okay? What did he achieve? A growth in waste and a telecommunications nightmare. So the question for us is, there a leader who can grasp reality? One thing is for certain, you won't find one on the water issue on the Labor side of politics. You won't find it. They'll be in bed with the Greens, there'll be a frog somewhere that can't be moved. The challenge for the Morrison government is enormous. We can't wait any longer. In 1974 and 75, a horse called Think Big won successive Melbourne Cups. The challenge for us is to think big.